Hello and welcome to Cloud Speed by Deloitte. In this regular podcast series, we'll delve into the world of cloud, answering some of those tricky questions, getting to grips with all that cloud has to offer, and keeping you up to speed on recent developments. So let's begin, shall we? Here is your host, Arti Balakrishnan.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth episode of our Cloud Speed podcast, and I'm your host, Arti Balakrishnan. I'm a director in the cloud engineering practice here at Deloitte, and I'm looking forward to exploring DevOps in the cloud in this podcast with Brian Neo and Paul Toller. Hi, Brian. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Arti. Thanks very much. Yes, so my name is Brian Neo. I am part of our cloud engineering practice, where I lead our DevOps engineering capability. So I started my career in environments management, and it's been really fascinating watching how the cloud has evolved the way that we implement and manage platforms, and also how the concept of infrastructure and coding have really melded together with infrastructure as code, and how the required skills in this area have changed. And I'm really excited to be talking about this with you and with Paul today.
Thanks, Brian. And Paul?
Hello, Brian. Hello, Arti. My name is Paul Toller, and I sit in Deloitte Digital, which is a part of our business that focuses on maximizing the positive impact of digital technology in our clients' businesses. Within Deloitte Digital, I sit on the engineering leadership team, and most of my work involves sitting across one or more of our product development teams, focusing on platform engineering or DevOps strategy.
Thank you both. I couldn't think of better people to explore this topic today. Let's dive straight in. And my first question to you is, when we talk about DevOps, what do we actually mean? Is it the culture, the team, or the tool chain, or a bit of everything?
It is a bit of everything, isn't it? I mean, if you think about it, most people tend to associate DevOps with continuous integration and continuous delivery solely. So you think of Jenkins and Ansible, for example, where actually, while they are important parts of enabling the key outcomes of DevOps, like automation and rapid feedback, you're not going to get very far without having the right people with the right mentality and skills behind this as well. So the concept of cross-functionality, understanding development, platforms, change management, security, for example, is really, really important as well. And underpinning all of this, a team will generally be less effective if you don't also incorporate the cultural mentality that really underpins DevOps. The whole concept of ownership of services, you build it, you run it, focusing on automation and continuous improvements. So it really needs to be a mix of all three, if you ask me.
Yeah, it's certainly a blend of different aspects of all three. I think it's important to consider the origination of it as an emergent movement, and what the problem was, or what the pain was that people felt back in the day that made it emerge. And if you look at some of the technology, there were already trends in place around homogeneous platforms, the likes of which have become Kubernetes and contemporary serverless platforms. And there was also an increasing maturity about the way we deliver software in terms of agile and lean methodologies and principles. So I think it really does come back to that cultural side. It's an area that as technologists, we haven't always been the best at, and trying to think of, have we really solved the issues of communication and collaboration barriers between different phases of our life cycle, and have we left teams siloed and isolated within each of those life cycle phases?
Fascinating. Now I would like us to pivot to a slightly different angle on the discussion around DevOps. Tech debt gets a lot of focus in application development. How do you think we can tackle tech debt for toolchain and infrastructure, though?
I just touched upon lean and agile methods, and I think one idea that's very critical within lean and lean manufacturing actually originally was the idea of stopping the supply chain or the manufacturing production line when there's an issue in it. And I think when it comes to the kind of software and infrastructure artifacts we build, it's very important to remember that if your delivery process is broken in some way, you have to fix that first and then continue delivering products. A lot of tech debt we see accumulate comes from the idea of just quickly hacking a fix within the actual fabric of the supply chain, or the deployment pipeline, as we call it itself, and plowing on developing more product features. It's important to distinguish what tech debt in our area will impact every product that's delivering using it, or is it something superfluous or ancillary to the main continuous delivery pipeline we build, or the main infrastructure platform that we build?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I mean, Paul, you and I have worked together, obviously, on various engagements. And we've seen one of the common pitfalls that we usually get is focusing on like short-term delivery or functionality, and really leaving considerations about how we're going to operate this, how is this actually going to work in production to the very end. And I tend to feel that when push comes to shove, I think our job as DevOps engineers, as people kind of responsible for the platforming of the application, really need to kind of stand our ground in terms of making or setting out the case for the importance, I think, of doing things right from the beginning, and also making sure that we're not incorporating, we're not cutting corners, as I said, I think, around doing things in a way that is manual, leaving automation towards the end, and then focusing only on short-term functionality. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to see the debt early in our area, because a failing unit test is a failing unit test, and you see the results straight away. With the challenges of testability in infrastructure, we're often dealing with trying to anticipate future problems and acknowledging the debt early on, rather than having the means to actually measure it earlier.
Yeah, and also kind of linked to this, the whole hero complex, which is something I see quite often, where your engineers kind of tend to be seen as the people fixing everything, and nobody really stops to think about, well, why is Dave, for example, up all night solving manual problems, I suppose? And sometimes it can be a bit of a kind of self-sustaining thing, where people kind of put themselves on the line to make things happen, and as a result, the troubles of incorporating tech debt kind of get hidden up to the point where person X can't really handle it anymore. And I think that's a really, really important thing to highlight.
I mean, often in those situations, the issue is less about the debt itself. It's more of whether you're deliberate in acknowledging it and making a conscious decision to sacrifice or trade off, let's say, quality for speed, or you're just being reckless, or having something happen accidentally that you don't later acknowledge via a retrospective and raise a test to test the fix that you then put in, or put it on some kind of ledger, whether that's work items in Jira or a big post-it notes on the whiteboard on the office, so that you can pay it back at a later date.
Yeah. So I think we are also talking about the cloud, and I think it's quite important to say that the cloud is a big enabler for DevOps. And as we think about toolchain and infrastructure and tech debts, there are loads of things that the cloud can do for us. Now, obviously, I mean, we talk about infrastructure as code, we talk about elasticity, agility, and tool chains, for example, and utilizing all the tools available for us to basically counter tech debt in the best way we can is really important. And as we kind of pivot towards the cloud, and we start seeing the ability to do things like, continuous integration pipelines in the context of kind of stringing all the bits of the cloud together. I think it's one of the things we really get from pivoting towards the cloud is it makes it much easier for us to do DevOps in the most efficient way possible, rather than relying on tools that maybe 5-10 years ago we wouldn't have had.
That's quite interesting. In summary, we seem to be going back to the same points around culture and mindset, acknowledging the fact that you have tech debt and not delaying the remediation of it till a later point in time. How do you think the shift from projects to products has helped in this context?
Well, Paul, you've got a few things to say about this, haven't you? I mean, in the context of what you've done in digital, for example. I mean, what have you seen so far?
I was thinking, for a change, I might bite my lip and not say anything. But within digital, I guess our taglines have always been variations on having a strong customer focus. And there's certainly no way that a richer customer feedback and closer contact with the customer would ever be to the detriment of the work we do. It's very much at the core of it. So we like to think about focusing on whatever it takes to deliver value to a customer, and that will always support delivering the right thing faster, with at a higher level of quality. I think the product mindset is very interesting because it's something that's always existed in non-software fields, and it's helped us in a way because DevOps has always been a fairly awkward phrase. It's essentially meaningless, and to understand why it's called that, you have to delve into the history of DevOps days and the like. But platform engineering has emerged now, and this idea of productizing infrastructure and being more professional in the way we manage the relationship with our customers, who are the developers, testers, and operators who then go on to use it to deliver product features, has been a healthy shift. And you all know, Brian, you can kind of say you're a platform engineer and have a few very tangible things to talk about, whereas the DevOps moniker has always been a challenge for us in terms of describing what we do.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think a lot of people sometimes forget that the whole concept of DevOps is around how do I deliver better value to my customers as quickly and as safely as possible. And I think having teams focus on overall ownership of an end product rather than just their slice of their involvement in it has really kind of helped to focus the attention, I think, of teams and people in general towards, is what I'm doing going to lead towards my customers benefiting from it immediately. So rather than just saying, I'm just doing what I need to do, and then I'll hand off to somebody else to finish the job, my job is now, or I'm now currently invested in the end-to-end success of the product. And I think from a mindset perspective, that's been really powerful in kind of empowering people and making people think along the right lines of value and the customer.
In summary, a shift from projects to products has helped platform teams articulate what they're providing to their customers a little bit better and drives that end-to-end accountability. A challenge I've been running into across a number of engagements is not often how to set up the DevOps culture or the mindset, because the people that are involved in the initial stages of this journey have already got that mindset. It's when we try and scale this across the wider organization that we run into challenges. Has that been your experience as well?
The question of how you scale a good technical platform and a good initial culture of a small team in parallel is a great one. In theory, it should be a self-fulfilling thing. But as you know, we're fairly adept at testing the technical aspects of a platform as it grows ever larger in terms of its capacity under load and performance under load. It's less easy for us to test culture as our program team scales or we move from a single product team to many product teams. And one area that's very interesting at the moment is involved in measuring cultural indicators explicitly and being able to keep tabs on the trends in them as a program scales or as a team scales. Then you have a means of knowing when you're breaking your culture, and you also have a means of allowing people the best chance of providing high software quality or high product quality as you get ever larger.
Yeah. And on that point, I think two things come to mind from my perspective. So first of all, to echo Artie's initial observation, I think there tends to sometimes be a perception that DevOps is one team's job, where it really isn't. I mean, it's a culture that everybody needs to embrace. And for the DevOps mindset to scale well and for us to deliver the DevOps outcome, it very much needs to be something that is adopted by the entire organization, and not for people to think that, I've got a DevOps team and therefore I am doing DevOps. The other point around this is around top-down investment. I think it's really important for, leaders to empower the teams to think in DevOps ways, and also to give them the flexibility to do continuous improvement. Because I think stifling motivation is really a lost opportunity for people to upskill themselves, and also to motivate and upskill the people around them as well, which is all around DevOps and cross-functionality. And on that point as well, I think one of my observations in terms of adopting DevOps and scaling this out is that some people tend to be, I think, a bit cautious of DevOps and the automation that it tends to bring to the picture. So distrust of automation, reliability, and also compliance in the context of DevOps has been a bit of a barrier towards continuous deployments. And I think one of the key things that we do have to kind of bring people in the journey is the concept of compliance being an integral part of the automation pipeline and security being fundamental towards the adoption of DevOps. I think these two things are some of the key concepts, I think, that people really need to bake into the adoption of DevOps for this to be successful and scale out.
So while there are a number of techniques to really scale the DevOps mindset and culture, it is a challenge that we're continuing to work through, I suppose. But honing in on the particular statement that you made around testing, while there are tools and techniques around non-functional testing, I think there's still significant room for improvement around testing for infrastructure. What are your thoughts?
Yes, well, certainly as far as infrastructure goes, testing's always been very difficult in comparison to functional testing of software that might be written in a particular language and have a testing tool set that goes hand in hand with the development tool set you're using. In infrastructure terms, the testing toolkit, if you like, required to test an environment has always involved a very diverse range of different tools, and no single solution has really emerged in terms of technology or approach. Nevertheless, things are improving, and it's quite interesting to look at DevSecOps, let's say, as an example of where there's been a gap in the evolution of DevOps itself. And the whole idea of shifting left with security testing has been integral to that movement, and kind of points out that we didn't do a great job of it in the first wave, if you like, of DevOps adoption. And there are many other things like that where we could be testing earlier and in smaller increments in the non-functional sense across our delivery pipelines.
I think that's a really good point. I think from an infrastructure and security perspective, I think it's fair to say we start at a slightly lower baseline compared to your typical software testing in terms of that. There are fewer, I think, good quality stubs. Automating integration testing can sometimes be a bit of a challenge. And I think this really puts the importance around doing an upfront investment in actually enabling this, be it, investing in stubbing out the bits of code, for example, that will facilitate these testings, automating things that normally take a lot of time, for example, like test data, for example, making sure that test environment management, for example, is automated, and reversion processes for your test environments are set up as well. Because from my perspective, I think anything in the CI/CD pipeline that cannot be automated is a missing link that will break the continuous delivery chain. And it's important for us to identify each of these bits and put in the investments required to make sure that at the end of the day, we have a pipeline that leads us all the way into production.
This ties in pretty neatly into the end-to-end accountability as well as the tech debt questions that we just went through earlier, in that testing is a critical aspect of technical debt I've observed. And if you prioritize testing as a clear aspect of your definition of done, then you would be able to work with that a lot better. Not just in Deloitte, but across the market, any skills to do with DevOps or platform engineering are in high demand. And we've been talking about how critical it is for organizations to have these skills in-house as well. So what do consultancies bring in this context?
So as we mentioned previously, I think successful DevOps transformation can only be delivered effectively when you consider the entire holistic picture, covering aspects like organizational structure, ways of working, engineering practices, and tools. And this is especially true when many companies are also in the midst of their own cloud transformation journeys as well, which means there are many, many moving parts. And I think where large consultancies really come into the picture in this case is providing the breadth and depth of expertise in all these key areas to be able to help deliver the effective end-to-end transformation. And also, I think inbuilt partnerships and relationships with the right vendors for the right jobs, basically, to help to make this process easier and more effective.
We often work with clients who don't know what the differentiating point of their product will turn out to be, or its USP as such. And in those kinds of situations, there's a lot of risk around taking on new talent, particularly now that within our field, some of the vendor technology stacks require a lifetime's worth of learning to become an expert at. So one thing that's quite handy about professional services is you have a means of dipping into different talent pools that possess those specialist skills without committing to the rather risky maneuver early of hiring several people who have a particular specialist skill set. The other thing I think consultancies bring in particular are a lot of people with the right aptitude. And by that, I mean, they have a general tool set for implementing patterns that they've seen that work well, rather than, going down the rabbit hole of becoming a vendor expert in a certain technology vendor portfolio, I should say. So again, this is the reason this is important, is it mitigates the risk of not really know what your successful thing is going to be yet before you run the experiments that help define it.
And I do think a big part of this as well. I mean, we spoke about skills and talent being a challenge in the context of cross-functional DevOps. And I think a great opportunity is, I mean, we think about the answer to this being getting new people in, for example, but I think there is a great opportunity in upskilling your own people who understand your organization, who maybe are a bit light in certain areas, but having, I think, the right external help from consultancies is where there is a great opportunity as well to retain your people, give them the right exposure, and also encourage them to learn the right skills to make this as self-sufficient as possible, I suppose.
So that's all we have time for on this episode. Thank you so much, Brian.
Thank you very much, Arti. Thanks for having me.
And Paul.
Thanks, Arti. It's been a pleasure.
So what we heard today on DevOps is all about the teams, the culture, the mindsets, the tool chain, how to handle technical debt, and the role that consultancies play. We will now move to the section of our podcast that provides product updates from various cloud vendors such as AWS, Google Cloud, and Microsoft Azure. Today, we have some updates on the Microsoft Cloud Platform, and this will be presented by our Azure Lead Solution Architect, Elliot Chappell. Over to you, Elliot.
Thanks, Arti. So, I'm here today to give you a quick update in terms of what's been happening in the Microsoft space. As you may be aware, Microsoft recently had its Ignite 2020 session, and I'm going to give you a few highlights out of their book of news, which can be found online just by searching Microsoft Ignite 2020 Book of News. And in particular, I'm going to focus on some of the key areas and announcements across Azure, Power Platforms, Microsoft 365, and security and compliance. So given that we've been talking a lot about DevOps today, in terms of how we can approach it, the mentality, and the other points that Brian and Paul have introduced to us, a couple of the key things I want to focus on inside the Azure space in particular are things like the release of the .NET 5 candidate, the improvements and cost-saving options that have been added to the Azure App Service, the improved GitHub integration, as well as some extra interesting things such as Azure Communication Services, Datadog integration, Azure Spring Cloud now supporting different development frameworks, and things as well such as Logic Apps with new hosting options, improved performance, developer workflows, and last but not least, in particular, the concept of an Azure private Azure marketplace. What this means is essentially that you can share your company assets or images between yourselves, so that you're not sort of reinventing the wheel every time, but without having to make it a public asset that other people can see. In the space of things such as business applications, so Power Platforms, obviously there's been big updates to Power BI, and there's been a lot of movement in the Power Platform low-code updates for professional developers, as well as a bit more of the Microsoft Power Automate desktop, so you can deliver a bit more of the robotic process automation for users. In the Dynamics 365 space, there's a new voice channel that's aimed to streamline contact center operations, as well as big things such as supply chain management tools and a bit more of a operational, complete cloud delivered solution for services and businesses using project operations. In the Microsoft 365 space, one of the key updates, and linking back to Brian and Paul's comments around collaboration in the team, are that there are a number of changes coming to Microsoft Teams in the not too distant future. These range from new calling features, so things like one-to-one call recording, transcription, to enhancements to the actual Teams chat and channel conversations to streamline communications, improved collaborations and making meetings better, as well as more interesting capabilities such as productivity checks, how people are feeling, and their sort of analysis of how they're doing. So basically, in a nutshell, these new Teams enhancements, along with a bunch of the other Microsoft 365 capabilities, are going to make Teams an even richer hub for collaboration moving forwards to support that DevOps practice. So from a security, compliance, and identity point, the last key things I just want to cover are, from a security standpoint, Microsoft Defender now is offering threat protection across Microsoft 365 and Azure. From a compliance point of view, there has been a release of the next generation of Compliance Manager. Microsoft 365 compliance ecosystem has been extended with other connectors, APIs, and other data loss prevention capabilities. From a security point of view, and there's been a large number of movements in terms of how to stay ahead of threats with new innovations from Azure services such as Sentinel, and including things like user and entity behavior analytics and threat intelligence enhancements. All of the things that need to be there to make sure that you've underpinned what you need from a DevOps point of view and platform for security before you get into the other bits. So that's it for today. Like I say, if you'd like to learn a little bit more about these updates, please have a look at the Microsoft Ignite 2020 Book of News, and you can see these and a lot of other updates from Microsoft, and have a good peruse.
Thank you very much for those updates, Elliot. The big focus on developer experience is a key part on improving adoption and driving better business outcomes. Glad to hear that in your updates as well. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into this episode of the podcast. I have certainly enjoyed exploring the many dimensions of DevOps with our speakers today. Until next episode, this is Arti Balakrishnan signing off and looking forward to catching up with you again in our next episode of Cloud Speed. Thank you.